Hey fellow babies, welcome back to Pactor Factor on Sifted.net. If you are a Patreon patron, we appreciate your support. Shane needs it, and please keep it coming. I'd hate to have to just truncate these one day because Shane goes bankrupt and his wife leaves him and his dog doesn't like him anymore. First question this week from Sifted, from Derek D111. Do you think that the end of net neutrality will ultimately hurt digital sales if people have to pay more for bandwidth? Will Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo have to pay ISPs for the faster download speeds for their customers? Okay, people don't have to pay more for bandwidth. So when net neutrality was the law of the land, the ISPs were allowed to charge users for more bandwidth. So net neutrality didn't keep them from charging the end user. Net neutrality kept them from charging the guys who put content out that passed through the internet pipe to the consumer. So they couldn't charge Sony for fast speeds for downloads of games. They could charge the user. They could cap your bandwidth, not your bandwidth, your consumption at 50 gigabytes or 100 gigabytes or 200 gigabytes, and then charge you for above that. Or they could charge you for faster speed, and we all pay that. They've always been allowed to charge us. They've not been allowed to charge Netflix. So when Netflix streams movies to you and you watch 40 hours a month of movies on Netflix or TV at 1080p, you're consuming 100 gigabytes or 200 gigabytes of data from Netflix. Netflix doesn't pay for that. They're the one who's clogging the pipe, not you. You pay if the ISP wants to charge you. When you get rid of net neutrality, Netflix might be asked to pay for clogging the pipe by pumping 200 gigabytes of movie and TV content through to you. And as we migrate to 4K, pretty simple. It's just 4 times as bandwidth intensive as 1080p. That's what the 4 means. So if, again, I'm making up the numbers, but if you're sucking up 100 gigs a month watching Netflix, and then you go to all 4K, you're going to suck up 400 gigs. So again, the ISP has always been able to charge you. The reason internet service providers are opposed to net neutrality is they don't want to charge you. They want to charge Netflix. And why, you ask, do they care? Well, first of all, by charging Netflix, it's anonymous. If they charge Netflix, they're not picking on you. If you're a Netflix subscriber and they charge Netflix, let's just, again, easy numbers, $2 a month per subscriber is how much Netflix has to pay to suck up all this bandwidth. Netflix has to raise price. If you're a Netflix subscriber, of course you're paying $2 a month more. You're getting a charge. But it's not a bandwidth cap. It's Netflix charging you for Netflix. If you watch 500 hours of Netflix or 1 hour of Netflix, you pay $2 a month more. If I don't watch Netflix, I pay nothing. So that, I personally think, is fair. I know people hate the repeal of net neutrality. Lots of reasons to hate it. This isn't one of them. I mean, charging Netflix is not one of them. So we can debate net neutrality because I'm a free market guy, and I actually think that the internet service providers should be able to charge whoever they want, and ultimately they'll get more money, they'll build more infrastructure. People who don't trust the capitalism and don't trust profitable companies to do the right thing, I get it. But anyway, so to answer your question, yes, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo will have to pay for faster download speeds. The point, though, is that the content you're downloading isn't that big. Like, how many games do you buy a year? 4? Okay, great. How many hours of television program do you watch a year over the internet? Let's just say the average game is 30 gigs. And let's say the average 1080p content is 6 gigs an hour. And again, that's about what they are. I mean, compression works for both of them. So if you want to argue with me that they're both compressed, great. But TV is about, an hour of TV is about 1/6 of a game. Trust me, you watch more TV than you downloading games. Trust me, by a lot. The average household watches 40 hours of Netflix. So if I'm right, it doesn't matter. If Netflix is 1/6 per hour of what a full game download is, after 6 hours, that's like downloading a game. You are watching enough Netflix to be the equivalent of 6 games per month. You aren't buying that many games. So yes, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo will have to pay, but no, not very much, because their games aren't that intensive. And the point is, they make so much more money on a digital download, they can afford to pay, we're talking about 3 cents a gig. We're not talking about massive fees, probably closer to a penny with all the compression that they can do. So a game is literally going to cost 35 cents. Who cares? They're making so much money on you. They might raise price by 35 cents to cover their bandwidth cost. I don't think so. So the answer is, I wouldn't worry about net neutrality in gaming. And multiplayer gaming, the reason you have the game on your console or on your PC is because the stuff that goes back and forth between you and the servers are tiny packets. So when you're playing League of Legends, you have that 38 gig League of Legends client downloaded to your PC in order to play it. There's very little data going back and forth. You don't have 38 gigs flowing back and forth with every move you make. You have tiny, tiny bits. Your PC is rendering everything you see on screen. So again, net neutrality is not going to affect any of that. It really isn't. You're right, it will affect downloads of games. It's just that nobody buys 6 games a month, you know. So television consumption is so much more. The repeal of net neutrality was a target on the back of Netflix. It was the ISPs who wanted to charge Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and all the streaming services, but not to screw the gamer.
No matter what, the consumer is ultimately going to get screwed because they have to pay more for something they were getting before.
That's correct. So the answer to that question is yes. If
So isn't net neutrality bad for consumers no matter what then?
No.
Repealing it.
It is not. So just like cell phone service, the more regulation you have, the more of a monopoly you create among the people who charge. So net neutrality repeal makes sense if you eliminate all regulation of internet service altogether. So what we had with cell phones, we used to have cell phone exclusivity. When I first got a cell phone, it was LA Cellular. And I had no choice, Verizon only. And if I decided to change plans, I had to give up my number. So in 2002, I think that year or something around there, Congress repealed all the regional exclusivity for cell phones, and they required all cell phone providers to share their towers. So I switched to Sprint. And my Sprint plan, I may get my signal from an AT&T or Verizon tower. They all share, and they all charge one another. And guess what? They don't charge me. They charge one another. And what happened? I used to pay for roaming. I used to pay for long distance. Roaming, I would be out of my Verizon area and I'd be using an AT&T tower, roaming charge. Do you pay roaming charges? What happened? Sprint, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon all scrambled. We need more customers. They all built towers, better service. You can see all the stupid Verizon ads. Here's the map. We have coverage of 97% of the population. They all scrambled. What happened? More towers, lower priced cell service. That's what we got. So when you say, is deregulation bad for consumers? Yes. If it's deregulation of environmental laws, yes. We're going to probably pump coal sludge into the river and somebody's going to get poisoned. That's bad. We don't want deregulation of like food safety. That would be bad, right? Deregulation of providing service to customers. This is a profit deal. So is ISP. The ISPs want to make as much money as possible. And you know what happens when you deregulate ISP? Today, I have a choice. I can get Comcast cable or I can get Verizon Fios, which is now Frontier. They sold it. And that's it. Why not open up ISP so I can get AT&T Uverse, I can get Comcast, I can get anybody who offers cable? Coming. So I agree. If you don't deregulate, if you give these guys a monopoly and then let them do whatever the hell they want, they screw the consumer. If you deregulate completely and you let everybody go everywhere, ultimately you end up with lower cost cell service. I am paying $118.01 for 4 phones. Unlimited data, unlimited talk and text, unlimited long distance, unlimited roaming, including international, and 30 gigabytes shared. trust me, the $29.50 I'm paying for my phone is about 1/5 of what I was paying 15 years ago. Our next question from Patreon from Gregor Gulwy. According to a report from SuperData, the most successful VR game for PC generated $2.6 million in revenue, compared to PlayStation VR, where the highest revenue is $2.1 million. With PSVR having sold more units than all PC manufacturers combined, is Sony doing a poor job at marketing PSVR? Why doesn't Sony generate more revenue? Thanks for a great show. You're welcome for the great show. I don't know the answer. I mean, none of these numbers matter at all. 2 million is a freaking rounding error. Put this in the context of, Call of Duty World War II sold 500 million in 3 days, or 5 days, whatever it was. So 2 million compared to 500 million, who cares? FIFA does $1 billion. Ultimate Team does 600 million. FIFA Ultimate Team. PSVR is an accessory. So it goes with your PlayStation. You don't own your PlayStation to play PSVR. You're buying other stuff. Vive and Rift, most people have a full-blown rig that they bought just for that. So I think that there's a higher level of commitment. There's a $2,000 level of commitment to play Vive or Rift, as opposed to a $400 commitment to play PSVR. So I think it's that. And I think that it tends to be people who have a lot more money playing with Oculus than the people playing on PSVR. And so PSVR was a nice indulgence for a few $100, but I don't really feel compelled to go buy games. Where Oculus, once you do it, you feel like you got to do it. But otherwise, I don't know. And again, I think you're talking about really small numbers. So $2 million, who cares? I don't care. 2.1 versus 2.6, they both suck. PSVR is a great technology. Sony, I think, had a really visionary idea. Let's use the console as the microprocessor and graphics processor for VR, and let's sell a relatively inexpensive, headset, and make everything work. How many developers are going to make games for something where the addressable market is 2 million? You're not going to sell that many units, and everybody's not buying everything. So it's a chicken and egg thing. I think the next iteration of PSVR will be untethered. I think that they will figure out a wireless headset. You can sit more comfortably. I think price is going to keep coming down. When it gets to be, a $100 add-on, or when you start getting a bundle with PSVR for like $400, then yes, I think you'll sell more games. I think Sony, it's going to take more compelling content. You need something that people just really want to play the game. Most of the games in virtual reality are like tech demos. I mean, they're fun, but after about 15 minutes, you've done everything you want to do and you don't really feel like doing it anymore. So it's not marketing, it's really manufacturing cost, pricing, and technology that's limited the adoption so far. Get rid of the cord, get the manufacturing cost down, get tens of millions of units of PSVR in people's homes. We're 3 or 4 years away from PlayStation VR being a big thing. But, Sony's horizon is 5 years. They're on track. It's early, small sample set, and nobody cares. Okay, our last question before I get into this week's whiskey lesson from Sifted, from Toothless Gibbon. With the recent announcement of Paladins Battlegrounds, how does copyright law work with regard to video game titles and modes? King of the Hill and Team Deathmatch are in every shooter, but when a mode is in the title of a game like Battlegrounds and PUBG, is it okay for other games to use it in their titles? You're going to find out when this lawsuit gets filed, and my guess is it will be filed quickly. The answer is that you can copyright a term that is not in the public domain, and when the term enters the public domain, you run the risk of losing your copyright protection. So the question is Battlegrounds, that word, enough of a public domain concept that it's not protectable? I think not. Okay, the word Halo, is what an angel has above its head. It's the name of a little tiny brand of, are they tangerines, those little tiny fruits? But, nobody confuses the angel's halo and little brand of tangerine with the game. But if you called another game, Paladins Halo, Microsoft would file suit and they would win. So the word Halo is in the public domain, but Halo as it relates to video games is not. So Battlegrounds, I think if you came up with a game and you called it like Vegetable Battlegrounds, and it was carrots. You know, it was essentially Fruit Ninja. You know, where the vegetables were fighting against one another, and it wasn't a game that was set up like a battle royale, you know, deathmatch mode, last man standing. You might be able to argue it, but if you use Paladin Battlegrounds, and notice P and Battlegrounds in there, so that a player unknown Paladin, and it's set up just like PUBG, first-person shooter, deathmatch, battle royale, last man standing wins. I don't think they have a prayer of withstanding a copyright claim. So the answer is, in my view, I am a lawyer, but I haven't practiced copyright in forever. I think they're screwed. I think it was a bad idea. I think if they called it Paladin's Deathmatch, they would have been fine. If they called it Paladin's Battle Royale, they would have been fine. Because the style of play is either, I've always called it Deathmatch, but I guess Battle Royale is the more popular. If they had said that, they're just making clear that's what it is. Battlegrounds is absolutely a direct ripoff of PUBG's name. And you don't even need to prove intent. I think absolutely they lose. But again, I've been surprised by stranger outcomes. So my bias is no, it is not okay for people to use Battlegrounds in their title. Don't be a fool. Stay in school. Don't drink and drive. Thanks for joining us on Pachter Factor. Hope you are a patron on Sifted.net on Patreon. If not, please follow me on Twitter at Michael Pachter, because I can use another 100 followers so I can pass that jerk that I don't like. That's 46,000. Thanks again. See you next week. So I think repealing net neutrality was a good thing. I'm in the minority. Please, no death threats. I didn't lobby for it or vote for it. Just my personal view, but I'm a capitalist, and I actually think over time, internet service is going to get cheaper and faster, and we're going to get more of it. And yes, we're going to pay more for Netflix. You're going to pay more for individual services that soak up a lot of bandwidth. Absolutely.
Pass that all on to
you are. So if my internet cost, which is $85 a month, including my home phone, drops to $60, and my PlayStation Network and Microsoft and Netflix costs go up by $10, I'm better off. I'll go from 85 plus all those things to 60 plus all those things and $10 more. I'm fine. That's what's going to happen.
I don't think most people look at it that way.
Of course not. No. Everybody wants everything free, but that's not how it works.
Free. They just don't want to get charged more for the same thing that they were getting before.
We're now to our whiskey lesson. You notice I didn't say Scotch lesson. I said whiskey lesson, because those Scots, they're such interesting guys. So the Scots invented Scotch whiskey, God knows when, but back a long time ago, thousands of years ago, I think. But it got to be a big deal in the 1700s. And at the same time as whiskey got to be a big deal in the 1700s, the trade between the UK and the Far East became a big deal. So the UK, they were imperialists, the British Empire. They would take their ships and they would have, communities in India and in Hong Kong. And so they used to go back and forth and trade, and they kind of owned those places, Hong Kong, as part of the British Empire. Excuse me. And casks of the Scotch whiskey made the trip on the ship, because you'd have a bunch of British people and Scottish people in Hong Kong, and obviously Hong Kong doesn't have the climate to grow peat moss and to grow barley and to roast it. So the Scotch made the trip, and it would take months, if not years, for a cargo ship to get all the way to Hong Kong. And they would bring big barrels of whiskey. So it used to be made in batches and drunk immediately. In the 1700s, the whiskey would make this trip in the ocean. And what the people in Hong Kong noticed when they got it was it tasted better. So the aging of whiskey began by putting these barrels on ships and going on these many, many month, if not many year cruises for trade. And obviously there were barrels that would go into warehouses in Hong Kong and get drunk later. But that's how we got aged whiskey. Anyway, on one of these trips, and I always get mixed up between Taketsuru and Hakushu, but some guy, I think it was Taketsuru, there was a Japanese guy who on one of the many voyages to Japan, he got on as a crew member on a ship, and he got himself all the way back to Scotland. And he was fascinated by the manufacture of Scotch whiskey. And so he realized that the northern islands in Japan had a very similar climate to the islands and to the northern parts of Scotland. And so he thought, we can make whiskey just like that. So he came back, and as I said, I think Taketsuru was his name. I always get mixed up between Taketsuru and Hakushu. I'll look it up. But he came back, and he started a distillery. And there are many of these. This is one of the cool ones. This is Hibiki. This is Scotch whiskey. You notice that it says Hibiki Suntory whiskey. It doesn't say Scotch whiskey. Look at this bottle. This is just a bitchin' bottle, isn't it? It's like a crystal bottle with a crystal top. Hibiki 12. This is way cool Japanese whiskey. I learned about Japanese whiskey because I watched the movie Lost in Translation. And I think that movie was 2004, 5, or 6, something in there. And in the movie, Bill Murray plays an over-the-hill actor who's washed up and he can't get any work. And the only thing he can get is a television commercial for Suntory whiskey. This is one of them. For the brand was Yamazaki. And his role in the movie is to say, Yamazaki, hai. So the first time I went to Japan, which is 2007, I went into the Grand Hyatt where I was staying for the Tokyo Game Show. I ran into Charles and Kai Wong, who were the creators of Guitar Hero, and they invited me up to the rooftop bar to have a martini with them. And there were like 6 of them from Guitar Hero. And I just, on a goof, said Yamazaki, hai. And the waiter brought me Yamazaki in a Scotch glass like this, which was the first time I ever saw one of those. And it was unbelievable. So everybody threw the martinis away. We all started drinking Yamazaki. Our bar bill was $3,600 in 2007. I made the Guitar Hero guys pay because they had just sold the company for $150 million. But it's really great whiskey. So I think that's cool. This is different. This is called Ohishi. Now this is also Japanese, but what is really interesting about this, and it says that they did it in a sherry cask. One of the more popular whiskeys from Scotland is called Macallan. It's finished in a sherry cask as well. So sherry cask whiskey tends to be dark colored and very, very flavorful. But this is not made from barley. This one is. This is made from barley. This, believe it or not, is made from malted and unmalted rice. This is rice whiskey, and it tastes like Scotch. Now, the fascinating part about that, one last little lesson on whiskey, Scotch whiskey must be made in Scotland. Scotch whiskey does not have to be made from barley, but to be called single malt, it must be made from barley. There's a second type of Scotch whiskey that tastes just like single malt that's called grain whiskey, and it can be made from any grain other than barley. So they make it there typically from corn, and they make it in exactly the same process, and it tastes the same. Same peat, same malt, same mature. And when you drink a blended whiskey, it tends to be a grain whiskey and a malt whiskey blended. That's why they're called blended. This is made out of rice. Why? Because it's Japanese, and guess what they have a lot of in Japan? Rice. So this is really phenomenal. I just recommend it if you haven't had it. Screw top, by the way. And then another example, just because I happen to have this one. This is a single malt. Notice it doesn't say Scotch anywhere on it, because this is Delback Dorado, made in Tucson, Arizona, home of the Arizona Wildcats. This is American whiskey, single malt. This is made exactly the same way as Scotch whiskey, made from barley, malted barley, single malt. The difference is that instead of finishing this with peat, so they have peat as the fire source, these guys actually use mesquite. Remember that barbecue example? This is mesquite smoked Scotch style American whiskey. Unbelievable. I have to say, if you want to ever have something really cool, the sad part about this is it's 59.2% alcohol. These are 43. So 59 is a lot more than 43. So you got to water this one down. This one's actually nice with some ice. So just to finish up our Scotch lesson, if you're over 30, you are not allowed to have ice in your Scotch, okay? Period. If you're over 30, you are required to drink it neat. If you're under 30, we'll give you some credit. You're still maturing and your tastes are still maturing, so you don't have to have that rule apply. You can have some ice. The only time you put anything in your whiskey above 30 years old is if the alcohol content is above 43%. Then it's okay to put a little water in. So with 59% by volume alcohol, you want to water this down to about 45%, which means about 3/4 whiskey and 1/4 water is okay. So half a teaspoon of water per ounce of this, good enough. That comes out really great.